see if I can make the technology work. Oh, yes. Hello, everyone. In addition to the museum, which you saw yesterday, the museum has been involved also a little bit in archaeology, and specifically underwater archaeology. We've been a little bit dormant in that area in recent times, but we took great strides in the past, and we're endeavoring to launch again into the future. I think when Nancy talked to you this morning about the National Cultural Policy, one of the subcommittees was a maritime committee, and we brought in a lot more partners, and you're going to see us doing the overview today. But anyway, just want to mention that. So, I'm going to give you a little nutshell to start with, and then we're going to launch through the whole story of how the trail was developed. So, the Cayman Islands National Museum, the National Trust, the National Archive, and the Department of Environment formalized a maritime heritage partnership way back in 2002 with the idea to combine heritage, education, and recreational tourism through a three-tiered approach to protecting, managing, and interpreting the island's maritime heritage sites. The partnership created a land-based maritime heritage trail, worked towards developing offshore preserve systems. Thank you, Nancy. As museums in the sea, and aspires to focus special attention on sensitive and significant sites that can be interpreted within traditional museums. Today, this Maritime Heritage Partnership, in cooperation with all maritime heritage stakeholders, and there are more that we've recognized on the island now, has the opportunity to grow by working together to create a more formal Cayman Islands Maritime Heritage Program. This would enhance culture, education, and tourism for all ages. And this would be by interpreting our maritime heritage in traditional museums and museums in the environment. I think that's something that we need to think about, that our whole landscape can be part of our museum experience. I also want to add that with Shanice and Brian, who you saw today, maybe we can launch some of this right into the digital age as well. The public are envisioned as stakeholders, guardians of the past, empowered by new awareness of their maritime heritage and culture. Okay, so away we go. This is the development of the Cayman Islands Maritime Heritage Trail and some future opportunities. Some of this, a little bit of history, this is the third time you've seen some of it, but maybe a slightly different angle. The Cayman Islands, as you see there, were an isolated landform out in the western Caribbean Sea. We're the tip top of great underwater mountain range. You see that one of our closest neighbors is Jamaica, but we're on a whole different geological plate. It's almost 5 mile deep between the two of us. And so in our isolation, certain things have affected our history. We, at this stage, have not found evidence of prehistoric presence on the islands, which doesn't mean that there isn't any. I can't believe that somebody didn't get blown off course in a canoe from Jamaica at some point, particularly the way that the currents flow, and didn't end up here. But it might not have been that hospitable because we had a lot of caimans here. So our recorded history, maybe the map from 1502, maybe Columbus is passing by in 1503, but we had European ships began to sail by the islands. Spanish, Dutch, French, English seafarers. And among them, you know, we do have some of the more famous names who have passed by here. One of them is Christopher Columbus, and his 14-year-old son Ferdinand recorded that in the sea, around it's Little Cayman and Cayman Brac, there were so many turtles in the sea, they looked like little rocks in there. And if you're a navigator, you think, ooh, hazards, you know, and then you plot it on your map and you say, oh no, that's a landmark, and then you go, ooh, that's a source of food. So that's kind of the part of the history of the Cayman Islands. Drake passed by here in 1585. He didn't have really very good manners. He landed on the island. He stayed 2 days. He couldn't find water. He took lots of beasts that he describes, but he lit the island on fire and he sailed away. Over 5 centuries of maritime heritage. So then what do we have here in the Cayman Islands? Well, before those guys came by, We had an untouched natural history, and that means that we have environmental, we have snails that don't exist anywhere in the world. We have endemic species that exist nowhere in the world. We're a little bit like the Galapagos in that regard. Maybe they're not big creatures, the blue iguana, endemic species that have been able to grow up in the isolation. And these were untouched until these humans started coming by. 1500s, again, hazards, landmarks, turtle fishing grounds. 1600s to 1700s, fishery camps, English settlement, pirates and privateers in the Spanish Main. In the 1700s, of course, we are in the seat of the sugar industry. We know a lot of the history of the Caribbean, the colonialism, the African slave trade, the whole thing. It's part of the history of our region, and it's part of the history of Cayman. That's when the early Caymanian shipbuilding really begins. There are historical records. We can find them in Jamaica and in England, other places that attest to that early industry. In the 1800s, the turtle industry flourishes locally. And people go further afield to Honduras, to Cuba, to other places, Nicaragua, to take turtles and to bring them back to the Cayman Islands. It's also the time when merchant trade is really ongoing, and emancipation occurs in the 1830s. And it's amazing because here in Cayman, the enslaved persons were not registered persons. When the news came that people were free, they were free. I think it's one of the rare things that we should particularly note about our Cayman Islands. The 1900s, 2000s, fishing, merchant trade, World War II, and tourism. So we're still in that era. So what kind of sites do we have around here? Well, a lot of our sites are maritime. So when I say maritime, I'm not just talking about shipwrecks. I'm talking about all things in the landscape, almost all the way down to the homesteads. You went to and visited Mind's Eye, Miss Lassie's house. That's, there's a ship called the Palace, and a lot of her home is built from parts from the salvage from that wreck. So we have shipwrecks and survivor camps. We have anchorages. We have places where ships were hauled over and careened on the bottom. We have forts. They might be smaller than some places, but we've got them. Same thing with lighthouses. We had shipbuilding and ship launching sites. Well, you can still see scars in the Iron Shore where the ships were launched. We have hurricane shelter caves still used today. We have maritime communities and architecture and continued maritime industry. Won't go too much into this history, but the foundations of maritime archaeology have been growing over the past 36 years. And I'm astounded to know, really, that back in 1980, I came to Cayman, first of all, on an underwater archaeology project. And essentially, this was, I guess, the home in my soul, and I've essentially never left. Anyway, on that INA shipwreck survey from Texas University, we recorded 77 shipwreck sites. We aspired over the years with governmental partners to create or to replace our abandoned wreck law. That is still to be done. Archival research and archaeological research was done on a number of maritime topics. In 2003, we launched the Maritime Trail with the partnership. 2003 and 2004, we worked to have the foundations for a shipwreck preserve system. So all of that stuff needs to get rebooted and move forward into this century, or this decade rather. 2011 to 2016, we are hoping to help the island work with these other maritime partners to revitalize. So why did this original partnership create a maritime trail? And who were these people? It was the National Museum. We house historical objects. It was the Cayman Islands National Archive with the archival documents. It was the National Trust, who actually have responsibility for historical sites in the environment. It was the Department of Environment, who's got a well-developed marine park system, research officers, and boats. They helped us. That was the foundation of this partnership. And so why did we do it? We thought that it would be fun and educational for residents and visitors. It would increase protection and appreciation for maritime sites. People would become guardians of the past, and it could be a tourism attraction. So there are multiple values for the Cayman Islands. I won't go into them all, but it is, using existing resources. It's a land-based attraction accessible to everybody. It promotes heritage, history, and pride, encourages travel around all the coastlines of the islands. It's a sustainable tourism model, but it's also very effective for local cultural and educational development. And it does promote preservation through the island's history and education. And I just should mention creative management for resources for the public. So what did we do? I mean, it's been a while, but we went about this professionally. What were our keys to success? It is to build relationships, and this is what we will do when we reboot again. With experts, government agencies, and the public. We held stakeholder meetings. I won't say that the partners didn't get together and half-bake the pie, before we took it, out to the public, but we took it out to the public, and we took it, we went to one of the hotels, had a big room, and anyway, we got people's buy-in. We looked at models that were available in other places. This is really happening all over the place these days. Florida is one of the leaders, but it's the Great Lakes, Australia, there's a lot of places it's happening. In Florida, they had established a trail system, which was in a lot of ways, it's a virtual trail because there's brochures on all these topics, the lighthouses, forts, coastal settlements. You couldn't go around the trail in a day in Florida. You could visit over a long period of time, or it could be a virtual trail. But that's where it came kind of special for us because another key to success is that recognizing needs for flexibility in new locations, situations, and infrastructure. Here in Cayman, we could actually create 2 land-based maritime trails, one around Grand Cayman and 2 that go around the Cayman Brac and Little Cayman. That's our second trail. But you could actually travel that trail in a day. You could take a busload of school children. You could take visitors to the island. You could make it a Sunday family trip. It's really accessible. It could be both physical and virtual. You could also sit in a chair and just read the guide. So what did we do? Well, we had a colorful poster brochure. I can pass a set of those around after the talk and everything. But they're real. I think they're real catchy. On the front, and you can see that they address Grand Cayman and the sister islands. Basically, there are 20 sites on Grand Cayman. There are 16 on the sister islands, being 8 on each of the sister islands, and each one of them, on the other side of this poster brochure, there is a paragraph and photograph of it. So you can drive around the island, you can see, a maritime sign at a certain location, and you can sit there and you can read about it. Now, I think in our digital age, Ryan and Shanice particularly can help us launch that into the next, where you can travel the trail back, where you are. These are the signs as well, just if you recognize them. A lot of them have been damaged. We've begun repair of them, but we really need to reboot the whole system. Anyway, it's the land-based driving trail with the signs and poster guides, and the sites are on all the islands. And what do we interpret? Well, we have a lot of different kinds of maritime sites, like maritime place names. That little island on the upper left is Owen Island, and on the shore there is Blossom Village. Now, the first surveyor to the island was Richard Owen, and his ship was HMS Blossom. But he never named those locations, those names. But the next surveyor, probably as a tribute to him, all of a sudden these names show up, and so it makes everything richer to know that. Lighthouses, maritime architecture. There's no better place to go today to see the shipbuilding skills of Caymanians, traditional shipbuilders, than to go into the post office, the library, the Elmsley Memorial Church, and look at the ceiling and see the beautiful mahogany ceiling that looks like the inverted hull of a ship built by shipbuilders. And then you see, this is a ship being launched, but you see it's being launched in that cut through the iron shore. And today you can still go see that cut in the iron shore and envision. I'm thinking that you can probably have a virtual ship launch now. Hurricane caves, they're still in use today. Hurricane Ivan, people were in it. Forts, they're small forts, some of them a little bit compromised, but we have forts. Turtle fishing industry. Okay, people went far afield to catch turtle, but they brought them home and they put them in crawls, or corrals, if you will, in a sense. Corrals in the sea where they kept live turtles to sell to passing ships or to take to other locations, Key West, Jamaica, other places, or to consume on the island at the time. There's anchorages. Well, what's so special about an anchorage? Well, if you find a good hole and the anchors get stuck, maybe there's 10 anchors there and they're from all different eras. So you get in there and go, ooh, that's from a frigate. Ooh, that's a colonial anchor. That's a schooner anchor. It makes it fun for the diving or snorkeling public. And again, we've got early explorers. We've got some of the activities like careening ships, various shipwrecks. That's actually the palace that parts of Miss Lassie's house maybe has parts from that wreck in her. Ooh, 5 minutes. All right, we got to move. There's probably 30 ships wrecked on that one East End reef. Okay, so 500 years of shipwrecks. This is a Swedish-built ship. It wrecked under Norwegian flag at East End. It was carrying red tiles for Mexico. Well, what happened with those tiles? Well, we found some of them in the old stepwell in Georgetown. But we've also heard stories from Miss Phoebe Spence, who grew up in East End but was later a teacher. She said, we used them for writing slates. And she said you had to be really smart because you had to erase your lesson. But there's a rich cultural history. There's lots of, the spider web of how things are related. Won't go too much into this, but we do have an abandoned wreck law. It says this vessels that have been on the, shipwreck material that's been on the seabed for more than 50 years is property of the Crown, but it doesn't claim it as a cultural property. We can use that to claim that for the people, which has helped us not enter into agreements with, prospectors or anything like that. So we've used it to our advantage, but it does need to be replaced. Shipwrecks come from more than 14 countries, and this is just countries where these ships might be registered, okay? I'm not going to read all those. You can look at them. But what's missing? Africa. The people on board aren't necessarily from the places that the ships are registered. Ships wreck here because of the wind and ocean currents, how they travel through the Caribbean. Ships wreck quite often. We're very low-lying island landforms, and they wreck on a lot of times on the windward side of the islands. This is an early 1773 Admiralty chart that plots a number of those shipwrecks. So these are among some of the kinds of ships that we have wrecked in our waters. And the second initiative we want to do is to interpret shipwreck preserves, and this is something that we can do. These are, the documentary history is known of a ship called the Gloms. There's a lot of extensive site features. It's on a healthy reef. You might notice that a lot of these photos show very clear water, robust iron features, a lot of favorable conditions whereby this could be, without spending money to buy a ship and sink it, you've already got resources, you just have to interpret it. This is another opportunity for partnerships. When we worked on mapping this site, it was the Maritime Heritage Partners again, but it was also East End dive operators who took us out for free in their boat. It was local community members who came and helped us, measure objects. And we did professional site recording with all those partners. We drew things, we mapped things. You see recognizable features that tell the story. The Gloms was built in Dundee, Scotland in 1876. She wrecked under Norwegian flag in 1913. And her whole story kind of tells how when she wrecked stern to the reef. And if you can go out there, it's kind of fun to see that from 0 to say 30 feet of water, you can tell the story of a ship that wrecked stern to the reef. And again, here's our clear water. One of the greatest resources Cayman has. We have no rivers, but we have very clear water. So this could be a model for preserves on other islands. We want the west end of Grand Cayman, Little Cayman, Cayman Brac, and I know I've had some words with Tim over there from the Turtle Center. He has some ideas about moving forward with some of the ideas of the preserves. The important thing, if you well, in creating the preserves and that sort of thing, you do have to have legal protection. And now we have a national conservation law that has finally, we used to be draft, when we started this, but now it's in place, and there is a mechanism to actually create a protected zone. The third initiative, this is more like for sites that end up being interpreted within the traditional museum setting. Okay. And so I won't go into this too much, but if you do that kind of work, you have a lot of, you have to meet funding, conservation, a lot of obligations. And we have some just a handful out of the, we've got 140 shipwreck sites that we physically recorded on the island. So just a handful of them are from the earliest eras, and some of that is, they're fragile and non-renewable. The Wreck of the Ten Sail, I can tell you more about that than you want to know. It was my PhD dissertation, Catch Me at Coffee. That whole row of top ships, 10 ships all wrecked on the east end out of a fleet of 59 ships in 1794 during the first year of the French Revolutionary War. And it was a captured French frigate, but she wrecked under British flag. That was her captain. He did survive after his court-martial to become an admiral later. The wreck is all along the East End Reef. This is one of the anchors. It's probably from the Convert. Cannons, French cannons, well, that's because it was Long Constant. It was a French ship before it was HMS Convert. Sometimes you can't even see what it is, but if you're trained, you can begin to see that the parts of the wreck are still visible in the environment. If you take anything up, you really ought to plan for conservation, and that's timely, it's costly, but it doesn't have to be that costly. You just have to have proper planning. We've had amazing opportunity. The Queen came to visit the museum in 1994 on the 200th anniversary of the Wreck of the Ten Sail, and it just happened to be that she sailed by at the time, and it was fun that we had an exhibit that was an HMS kind of. So future directions, this is the end. So the government has clear legal jurisdiction over the seabed. The museum has the opportunity with its enlarged range of partners to develop a cooperative network to create a marine program. The Department of Environment continues to provide a good operational platform, boats and that sort of thing. The new conservation law is in place. And we can now continue, probably better, right now we can continue to work to achieve appropriate legislation, because now we have international standards, not just the ICOMOS Charter, which is a best professional practice document, but also the 2001 UNESCO Convention, which is a legal document. So the Cayman Islands Maritime Archaeology Program can develop upon the foundations of maritime archaeology built over the past 3 decades, harnessing these unique data so that maritime tourism, culture and heritage, may be developed robustly. It's both culturally authentic and environmentally responsible. So the Maritime Trail Partners, our 3-tiered approach, as you remember, is to protect, manage, and interpret these resources. Why? Understanding, management, and promotion of maritime heritage provides enjoyment and education for the public, encourages appreciation and protection for sites, strengthens national identity, and enhances the economy through tourism. So this maritime heritage is important to the Cayman Islands, to the Caribbean region, and really, to world history. So thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. We do have time for a couple of questions. We have one here. And then I've got one as well, if I can jump.
I know you had to go really quickly, and thank you for that presentation. There was a slide that you skipped through really quickly, and you said there were no Africans, and I wanted to see the list that you had on that slide. Is it possible to flip to it? And I wasn't quite sure what you were speaking to with that slide.
What I was just saying is that right now we have done physical inventory of shipwreck sites around the island. We know that we have Spanish, Dutch, French, English because of the artifacts on board or where ships were registered. I do not see Africa on that list, but I do believe that people of African descent got to this island by shipwreck. We have a story of the slave ship Nellie, which is supposed to have wrecked at East End. You know, it even shows up in the history books. And I have yet to find why, what the source is. But I feel like even with the wreck of the Ten Sail, we didn't know the names of the ships. There's a lot we didn't know. We can find that history. And I had the opportunity actually to work on an archaeological site in the Turks and Caicos. It was a ship called well, it was in the papers, it says Troubadour, really Spanish Troubadour, but it wrecked in the Turks and Caicos in the 1840s when slavery was still on in Cuba, but not in the Turks and Caicos. So because that ship wrecked in the Turks and Caicos, there was a legal whole system that happened that ended up meaning that the people on board that ship that were intended for slavery ended up becoming free and living in the Turks and Caicos. And there are villages, there's stories to come around that. So, you know, what is our story? I don't really know, but I'm just saying, because you don't see a ship registered or that I see a ceramic from Africa, you know, on the shipwrecks we've found so far, I just have to believe, you know, because of, well, oral history and because, look at the population of the Cayman Islands. They're people again, are quite varied descent. Does that answer?
It does. The only other question
Yeah.
I had is, and you might be able to
Yeah.
answer this, the many places we've been to during this visit, there's discussion about the importance of turtles and turtle meat.
yeah.
And if this area served as a provisioning site
It did.
for some of the ships that went through.
It did. Spanish, Dutch, French, English. It's recorded in the literature that they actually, in the historical documents, that people actually stopped here to provision their ships. With fresh turtle meat, because, see, they could take them live aboard. They could, you know, salt and or smoke some of them, but they would actually be able to keep them alive on board and have fresh meat to feed their crews.
And so I think Peggy means that there's no doubt that there were Africans on those boats.
Oh.
We're still finding the actual resource information to
Yeah.
prove that, though, right? And that's
Yeah.
an ongoing
Yes,
process.
yes, I mean, it has to be, but it's research. That's the one thing about archaeology and museums and collections and everything, is you build upon foundations. And just because you don't know it today, or you sense it, you over time, maybe it won't even be my generation, you know, I don't know, but it will be discovered or rediscovered.
Thank you, Peggy. So my question is, it's a bit more of a practical question, because we are looking at this idea of partnerships and non-traditional partnerships, and you had 4 partners on that project.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm interested in learning, because I'm so excited to see that it's revitalizing, or that you're very passionate about bringing it back to life. When you have 4 partners, do you have a project leader who's responsible for the ongoing management of the project? Because that's where I think things get difficult. There's a lot of passion at the beginning, and then what about the maintenance?
Well, I mean, when we developed this trail, we had a lot of allies, but really the museum was the leader in this. But we also had Dr. Philip Pedley from the archive, who had a passion for history, and you know, he understood the need, and so he chaired that maritime, he chaired that committee. He also chaired earlier committees where we were working to improve the legislation. I mean, the abandoned wreck law is great because it says, you know, things that have been on the seabed more than 50 years are property really of the people. But it falls short of recognizing them as cultural property. It was established when people were thinking of treasure and that sort of thing. But government has never entered an agreement, to my knowledge, with treasure salvers. We do have prosecutions on record for people infringing, you know, on some of that. But when we did do the research in the past, and just Nancy, you know, for your background is, you know, we had somebody from the legal department on board, and you know, we were trying to see if we should amend our current law, and ultimately it was decided that it really needs to be replaced. You know, it needs new legislation, not just to so.
Dr. Peggy,
Hi.
the
Yes.
original peoples of the Caribbean, Taínos, Caribs,
Yes.
who occupied Jamaica,
Yeah.
Cuba, Puerto Rico, they seem to have had a command of the geography of the Caribbean,
Yes.
and they shopped in this area for
Yeah.
specific things which were unique to the area, such as turtle, which was prolific here, with species which were kind of unique at that time. So they knew the area. Is
That's
there
good.
any tracking? There has been some discovery and historical documentation in, I think, the Institute of Jamaica regarding them traversing here. Do we have any records of tracking?
I don't, I've heard that there are objects deposited by people from Cayman in Jamaica. I guess it would be the Institute of Jamaica. And I have tried to follow up on that, but I was told that they had not found any. Now, we have done a lot of work on this island. We have bulldozers running rampant on land, and in the through the 90s, in the early part of the 2000s, we were chasing bulldozers on land, just trying to preserve artifacts that were at least tied to this parcel of land, or that parcel of land. So we did catalog those objects, but sometimes it's just coarse earthenware. I won't say that in the collections that we already have in the National Museum that we do not have evidence of prehistoric presence or someone having visited, having brought those objects here. But I will say at this stage, again, that's where research comes in and where future generations come along. If we hadn't been here to preserve the objects that were being bulldozed away, there would be nothing. And so that's a wonderful thing in the museum collections, is that we have over 100 boxes of mostly cataloged, roughly cataloged, some more detailed cataloged objects that are available for future generations to study. And I just can't believe it either, but Bermuda is supposed to be in the same situation. And because we're isolated out in the Western Caribbean Sea, and because the currents from Jamaica come from east to west, and you'd have to, traverse backwards without sail. I'm not saying people couldn't do it. I'm sure that people did. People went in catboats from Grand Cayman to the sister islands. So, but I don't have, written evidence or firm evidence. But let's find it.
Still got to be research.
Let's. I will say one very interesting thing. There's a map of Jamaica that has a little notation on it. It's 1545 and it's French. And it says, to the west of Jamaica are 3 small islands where there are lizards as large beef, and they are very dangerous.
Thank you, Peggy. That's wonderful. That's a great line to finish on. Okay, so thank you. And I also wanted to just wrap up by saying this is a great model, as you said, to potentially share around the region. I mean, we all have a maritime heritage. And so if you do want to talk to Peggy a little bit more about sort of how to get that off the ground or to share some of the resources, please let her know, and we can also connect you via email if you...
And I might say that I think in Jamaica, I've given some of these talks over the years, and in Jamaica, I think they have started some heritage trails.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tim, just very, very quickly, because we're... Yep.
There's a connection where that I spotted in something some years ago through some research between the shipwrecks and a very important piece of cultural history when George Gould came here that I think really we need to research some more.
Oh.
I think he did a census. And there was 3 categories of people here at the time. And we need to find out what that third one was, because I heard it's connected to shipwrecks. There was the, I forget what he called them, but basically the whites, or Europeans, or whatever you call them, right? And then there were the slaves. There was a third category, I understand, arose out of the shipwrecks. It was what's called free colors. And as I understand, that was an interesting thing that they did in the time. Something when a ship was wrecked, we were talking about the origins from Africa, right? That when a ship was wrecked, there's a suggestion that if there were slaves on that ship, that it became, if you like, something viewed as the reason why they need to be now freed, and they became freed through the shipwreck. Now, that is just a snippet of information, but can you imagine, that the interesting things that could come out of that, if we can really delve into that a little more, find out what that was all about, how it was constructed, and how it actually exhibited itself in the lives of people back.
It's a great point.
Before emancipation,
Yeah.
this was way before.
Oh, yeah. 1802, there's a census. It's very detailed.
Yeah.
But the 1773 Gald map that you're talking about has a written description of some of the findings on the island. But I know the data's out there, that those documents are somewhere, and we just need to work together to find them.
Yeah, it's a big call out again for more investment and research. Which I
And
believe is
that's, I
coming.
didn't mention this, but this is something that's really, really important. A little of what's hampered Cayman's, getting into the research is that does take time and expertise and so forth. So I would like to see over time more involvement with the local universities and overseas universities partnering with us, and even Caymanians studying at overseas universities and bringing the knowledge home.
Just one comment, I think,
Uh-oh.
an answer to Tim.
Yeah, yeah.
Good afternoon. I don't know if many of you know who I am, but my name is Tammy Seltzer. I'm from the National Archive. Just wanted to say that the first census that Mr. Tim is referring to is actually Corbett's report, which was in 1802. The gold map was in 1773. The National Archive not only collects records here in Cayman, but we have a very strong copying program in which we copy records from very many places around the world which have had interaction with Cayman, such as Spain, the UK, Jamaica. We've gone to The Hague, we've gone to Madrid, etc. So we do have records that Peggy had talked about, basically in helping with the Maritime Heritage Trail. But one of the interesting thing is that the oldest local record in the archive is called the Public Recorder's Law, which dates back to 1810. Basically, this person was, his name was James Coe, and basically people came to this person to record official events such as wills, sales of land, etc. And in those records, there are actually records of slavery, sales of slaves, manumission of slaves, etc. And anybody who wants to come and visit the archive to have a look at these records, they are available for you to have a look at.
Maybe there'll be something regarding the Nellie. I can't believe the early history, the first little history that was done of the Cayman Islands mentions the Nellie, and at this stage I've never been able to find why.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much.